Before we begin today, I want to invite you into a small pause. Not a big reflection, just a gentle one. Can you recall the first thing you said to yourself this morning? Not out loud, not to anyone else, but that first quiet comment or question that appeared in your mind after you had woke up. Maybe it was about your body, your energy, your to-do list, something you were worried about, or something you already felt behind on. Now, if you were to zoom out for a moment and look at your inner dialogue as a whole, what do you think the balance would be? If you were to estimate how much of what you say to yourself during a normal day is supportive and how much is more like questioning, doubting, or quietly critical. Not to judge, just to notice. Because today's episode is not about positive thinking, and it's not about telling yourself that everything is fine when it isn't. It's about how you lead yours through the words you repeat, often without even realizing it. I'm Hanna Zaxmy, your leadership coach, and this podcast is your confidence boost in color. Let's go. Just before we continue, if you find yourself coming back to this podcast, this conversation supports you in any way, I'd love for you to follow the podcast or leave a review or comment wherever you are listening. It helps others to find this space, and I truly appreciate you being here. There is a quote by Audrey Hepburn that I've returned to many times over the years. It says, "Nothing is impossible. The word itself says, I'm possible." And I love that. Not because it's cheerful, but because it puts me into a more resourceful state. It doesn't say everything will be easy. It doesn't say things won't fail. It simply says there is possibility within you even when things feels heavy. And that's the mindset I want us to explore today. Moving from this feels impossible to I'm possible, also here. If you listen to episode 9, Stop Shrinking to Fit, Lead from Your Full Palette, you might remember that I shared something very personal there. How I used to put junior on myself, not because anyone else demanded it, but because I said it to myself quietly, repeatedly, almost like a safety mechanism. And what I've learned since then is this: the most limiting words in our lives are rarely shouted. They are whispered, repeated, and slowly normalized. They might sound like, I should know this by now. Who am I to? What if I get it wrong again? Others seem to handle this better than I do. And when those words go unchallenged, we don't just doubt our actions, we start doubting who we are. This is where empathy comes in. Not empathy for others, you're probably already very good at that, but empathy for yourself. Empathy says, of course this is hard. Of course you're affected. You're human, not a machine. And empathy does not remove responsibility. It doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It doesn't avoid learning. It simply creates enough safety for truth to emerge. Because without empathy, we don't reflect. We defend ourselves or we punish ourselves. I want to share a client story with you. I call her Helen. Helen was new in her role. A small organization, high expectation, and then something deeply shocking happened in her immediate environment. An event that shook her and the people around her to the core. At the same time, Helen wanted to be strong, present, reliable for her team, so she kept going. Later, when the dust had settled, she could see that she had made mistakes, many of them. Actions and behaviors that, in hindsight, had impacted the team negatively. A month later, when we first spoke about this, Helen was incredibly hard on herself. She replayed everything, questioning her judgment, her leadership, her worth. So we slowed it down. We separated what happened, what she knew then, and what she knows now. And slowly, something shifted. Helen began to see that responsibility is not the same as self-punishment, that learning is not the same as failure. Much later, after a long time, we spoke again. She had just received another very tragic message. And there it was again. The fear. What if I do it wrong again? And our conversation became a reminder. Mistakes will happen. What matters is that we take responsibility, learn, and act differently next time. When Helen reconnected with everything she already carried in her experience bank, her posture, it changed. Her voice, it softened. Her focus moved from impossible to I'm possible. Not perfect, but possible. There is also another important angle here. What we think doesn't stay neatly on the inside. Our thoughts leaks. They leak through our body language, through our breathing, through our tone of voice, and through what we communicate in subtle ways, even when we don't say anything at all. Yes, it can be very subtle, but we're human, and when we are under pressure, it becomes much harder to keep the poker face. This was something Helen became very aware of. In situations where things started to feel out of her control, she noticed that her body tightened, her shoulders, it was lifted, her posture, it collapsed slightly, and her breathing became very shallow. And yes, others could sense it, even if she didn't say it out loud. So one of the most important shifts for her was giving herself permission to regulate in the moment, to intentionally change her posture, to place her feet firmly on the ground, to gently open the chest, and to make a few slow, deep breaths. Not to fake confidence, but to help her body remember that she was safe enough to think clearly. Because when you lead yourself on the inside, your presence follows. And that matters, especially in situations that feel challenging or emotionally loaded. And I want to add one more tool here, because sometimes the inner voice isn't just questioning, it's nagging relentlessly, repeating itself. And when that happens, trying to argue with it often doesn't work. So instead, change the voice, literally. If that critical voice sounds serious and convincing, try replace the same sentence in a completely different pitch.
Maybe it's the voice of Donald Duck.
Or why not Chip and Dale?
Or any voice that feels absurd enough to make you smile. What usually happens is this. You start laughing or smile at the absurdity of it. The spell breaks, and suddenly it becomes much easier to step out of the loop. Not to dismiss yourself, but to regain choice. Because confidence is not about silencing your inner voice. It's about not letting it run the show. This brings us to the truth. Not the harsh truth, with something used against ourselves, but the grounded truth. The truth might be, I am human. I can make mistakes. I take responsibility. I learn. I grow. I do better with awareness than with self-attack. And when that becomes your inner narrative, your action change. Not because you push harder, but because you lead yourself more honestly. I want to invite you into a simple reflection. You can do it right now. So first, zoom out. Imagine the situation you're in right now. Maybe a situation that feels heavy and uncertain. Now ask, if this were happening to someone I care deeply about, what would I say to her? Second, notice your pattern. What is the sentence you repeat to yourself under pressure? And finally, set an intention. Not to silence the voice, but to lead it. Maybe it sounds like, I am learning. I don't need to have all the answers today. I am possible also here. If this episode touched something in you, you don't have to figure everything out on your own. Sometimes having a space where you can reflect without judgment make all the difference. If coaching feels like a support you might need right now, you're warmly welcome to reach out. And if this podcast has been supportive for you, if this conversation helps you to pause and reflect or lead yourself with more kindness, I would truly appreciate it if you take a moment to follow the podcast or leave a review or a comment wherever you are listening. It helps the podcast to reach more people, and it means a lot to know that this space is landing with you. So remember this, whatever you are facing, you don't need to be flawless to move forward. You just need to remember that you are possible. Be confident, be you.